As you can tell, I swatch in a number of different ways, and I'm going to be talking more about how and why in a second. But what I wanted to make clear is that there is no right or wrong way of swatching. All these swatches are completely different. All these swatches are completely correct because they do what I need them to do and they serve the purpose for which I created them. So with no further ado, let's talk all things swatches, swatch books, and more. Hey, welcome back to my channel. If you've ever wondered about swatching watercolors, why people do it different ways, why I swatch the way that I do, what a swatch book is, what's in my swatch book, and what system is working best for me, then this is the right video for you. I make weekly art videos, and today I'm going to talk all about swatching and all about swatch books. When I am referring to swatches, what I mean is essentially a mark that you're making in order to understand the qualities of the art material that you have, to know how they work together, how they mix together, or just to have a better idea of what the colors are. Whether it be watercolors, acrylics, pens, whatever it is, if you are into watercolors like I am, then you will know that quite a lot of the time, the color that you see on the pan or the color that you see on the packaging is not the actual color of the paint. And that is why I love swatching. That is why I recommend swatching, because it kind of helps you understand your materials a bit better. When it comes to a swatch book, that's essentially where you put all these swatches together and organize them. Almost like an encyclopedia of the paints and art supplies that you have. There are so many different ways of doing this. I myself have several different ways. However, this is my current favorite, which I'm going to highlight. And if you're interested in knowing more ways to do so, then that's something that I can talk about in a future video. A special thank you to all my Ko-fi members. Thank you so much for not only supporting me and my art journey, but also for keeping this channel running. Thank you all so much. First things first, I want to talk about the actual swatch book itself, like why I'm using this book, the setup with the rings, and then I will talk about how I actually do my swatches. This is my main swatch book, shall we say, which is quite massive. It's an A4 moleskin watercolor sketchbook, and the modifications that I made I always feel quite barbaric when I describe this, but essentially I cut out the spine and then hole punched the edges and added rings because I wanted to basically create my own ring bound sketchbook. The main reason that I wanted to do it is because with this format I am able to do hole punches and then add and remove pages as I see fit and mix up the order and change it in any way I want. I can hole punch any piece of paper. So for example, this is the dot card that I got from Daniel Smith. I have created a video for this and I will link it for you down below. And I just hole punched it and added it in. I don't have to swatch in the sketchbook itself if I don't want to. And once I did the swatches, I was just able to add it to my swatch book. I have a special hole punch which I will link down below because they are disc bound hole punches, which essentially means that they have slashes as well as a semicircle or different shapes. Some are called, I think, cinch. The one I have is Levenger. There's a whole bunch of different ones, which I will link down below for you if you are interested. This works for anything. So if I want, I can get any piece of paper, I can swatch on it, and I can add it to this book. So it just gave me this level of flexibility that I really, really wanted, because I started completely overthinking this. I was thinking, well, what if I want to have a section with blues? What if I want to have a section with yellows? What if I want to change this? What if I want to use a different paper? How will I stick it in? What if I want to reorganize it? Am I going to have to swatch multiple times, which I do not like doing? Like completely overthinking it. And this just offered me the level of flexibility that for now I am absolutely loving. Not being able to move things around was really a barrier to me actually having a swatch book. Now, swatches, as I mentioned, is just a way for you to be able to see the color as well as the properties of the paints or the markers or the pencils or whatever art material you have got. My main thing when it comes to watercolors, and that is primarily what I'm going to be talking about in this video. So one key thing that you will notice across all of them is that there will be a black line at the very least. And here I decided to do it a bit differently and do it across. And this black line is there for me to kind of determine whether the paints are transparent or semi-transparent, aka will they leave a bit of residue over that black line if I use it to paint. And given that when I do urban sketching, I quite often lay ink down first, that is something that I want to know. And it's not just a question of the darkness of the color, but actually the quality of the paint itself. Some are transparent and some are semi-transparent, some are semi-opaque, and so on and so forth. So for example, the wisteria, although it's a light color, it's kind of left a little bit of white residue over that black line. So I know that if I were to do a painting with it, it would be semi-transparent. I would do one swatch where I'm kind of doing a gradient so that I can see all the colors that come out of it. I also add a whole bunch of water towards the end and the middle so that I can see the granulating properties of the color if there are any. I then like to do 1 or 2 lines where I can see just the color without fading it, without doing anything to it. This is the pure color. So this is another example of a swatch card that I did. These are the Paul Rubens swatches, where again I just wanted to kind of know the colors, which I did, but then more than that I wanted to play around with them. So here I'm adding different amounts of water and I am doing floral swatches. This is my Raymond Schmall palette, and for this I decided to do some loose florals again as swatches. And again, one of the things that I loved about it is because I add more and more water as I get further out, I can really see the granulation properties of these colors. I will also want to know the lifting property, or you know, how staining is it, and that is what you will see here. After painting everything, I will go back, use a clean wet brush, try and scrub away the paint, use some tissue to lift it and see whether they lift or whether they're quite staining. Can I correct any mistakes that I make with it or not? These are the different things that I'm trying to figure out. And what you can see here, for example, is like at a quick glance, some colors are better than others, but as a whole, Holbein doesn't tend to lift very much, whereas the Daniel Smith colors tend to lift a bit better. The Daniel Smith colors have some beautiful granulating colors, like the shadow violet, whereas the Holbein don't seem to granulate. So these are kind of different things that you can see when looking at it straight away. When I was playing around with the core watercolors, they were moving across the page like nothing I'd seen before. So it made me kind of more curious about what other watercolors would do that. So as well as doing these kind of leaves swatches, I would also add like a little bit of water and then drop some paint to see how much the paint would move across the water. So again, that's what I mean about keeping it flexible and doing what you want and trying to ascertain the properties about the watercolors. Now, when it comes to how to swatch, you can swatch in a number of different ways. And as much as I initially started doing squares, eventually I realized that I sometimes find that a bit boring. So I tend to swatch in a whole bunch of different ways. This is just one of them and I will link the video for you. But it's me essentially swatching the Holbein watercolors, and I have just drawn some tubes. Some paint tubes, and I have done black patterns across. All of these are swatches. All of these give me different pieces of information that I want to know about that specific paint at that specific time. All of them are correct because they fit for purpose. So if you want to do like nice, neat squares or rectangles, go for it. If you want to do florals, then go for it. If you want to do leaves, do that. If you want to just do lines next to labels, do that. If you want to do paint tubes and then paint them in, then do that as well. Literally, the world is your oyster. All of them are different and all of them give me the same information. I just tend to like to do things in different ways. There is no right or wrong way of doing it. It's just a question of knowing what properties do you want to document down, what do you want to know, and how can you best convey that in this book or on this paper. The information that I always want to know as a minimum is the name of the color, as well as the pigment information and the light fastness information. That is what I want to know as a minimum. That being said, as I have continued to evolve, I have continued to want to know more. So I actually tend to write everything that is provided to me. And what that means is that as well as writing the name, the pigment information and the light fastness, I will also write the granulating properties if that's been shared. I will write whether it's transparent, semi-transparent or semi-opaque, and I will also write the kind of staining property or lifting property. I also like writing the pigment information because although when I started I wasn't interested in pigments at all, I now am. So I'm so grateful that I have done that, and it's not something that I have to go back on and do. So just think about you as you continue to evolve as an artist. It may be some information that you want to know, and this is helpful in not only understanding color harmonies more, but having a better understanding of what colors mix together, having a better understanding of what colors may fade because the pigments are naturally fugitive, and what colors are better quality. And also you will find that names across brands don't necessarily correlate to this pigment information. So it essentially means that as you continue to develop as an artist, you'll have a better understanding of the colors that you like and why you like them. So that's why I like writing that. The light fastness is relating to whether it will fade or not, or essentially how long it will last when exposed to direct sunlight. So if you're doing art in your sketchbook, it bears less importance, but if you're doing art that you're planning on having out in the living room, for example, or out in the sun, or is going to be exposed to sun, then that has a higher level of importance. So this is the information that will most likely be highlighted on the back of your paint tube or your paint pan or whatever medium. I don't think that you need to get overwhelmed by trying to figure out or memorize what does what and what is what. I certainly do not do that, but I do make a note of it in case it's something that I want to come back to. So as well as having swatches, I will also have like color wheels where I'm trying to play. I will have more swatches. So for example, these are all the Turner acrylic wash. I will have comparisons that I'm doing side by side. So this is a separate video that I will link down below for you, whilst comparing Daniel Smith with Roman Schmall, with Schminke, all these beautiful colors to just see how they compared to each other. And these were colors that by eyeballing, I felt like there was some sort of relationship, or, you know, that they were quite similar, and that perhaps you would want to see so that you know which one to get and you don't get both if you don't want to do so. So I will have things like this where I'm playing with colors and I'm comparing. When I was going to Venice and I couldn't figure out which blues to take with me, which felt like such a massive decision given all the beautiful canals that I was going to be seeing, I swatched them out, and I swatched them out in different ways, and I then wrote information about them, whether they were warm or cool, whether they were pigmented or not pigmented, could I lift them or could I not lift them, were they grayish or were they bluish or were they purplish. All that information I wrote on that as well. And then on the back, I played with some more colors because, as well as the blues, I was very aware of needing to create beautiful Venetian reds and I didn't have a Venetian red, so I started playing around by mixing different colors. So for example, this is my Indian red, this is my burnt umber, this is cadmium red deep with Payne's grey, and just trying to see what different colors I could get, what different mixtures I could get. So it's very much like color play and trying to figure out what I can. I know that I don't have a messy sketchbook per se, but this is probably the closest thing that it gets to it, and I absolutely love it for that reason. This is my place to play, this is my place to put together palettes, this is my place to read pigment information and use dot cards and do all that and more. Yes, so this was again from my Daniel Smith video. I basically swatched the dot cards on my Moleskine watercolor paper. Those are the sketchbooks that I primarily use, and I just wanted it to be bigger, which is why I did it this way. I still have my black lines so I can clearly see how transparent they are or not, but also more importantly, I can see the quality of the colors a lot better because the swatches are bigger. And when it comes to things like granulating colors, you can really see them more if you add more water and you have more space to play around with them. So for example, a good example of that is comparing the shadow violets. So if you were to look at it here, you would think like, okay, yeah, it's a nice grey. But when you actually do a nice big swatch, you can see that there are hints of green and hints of blue within it. And you can really see the granulation that you would miss out if you only swatched very small. So this is why I sometimes do just a small swatch. Sometimes I do a big swatch. But the key thing is adding lots of water, playing with it and seeing the properties of the paint. This book, as you can see, is massive. So this is a book that I come back to for reference, or I come back to if I'm doing like studies in the studio, or I come back to because I want to know more information about it. So I tend to write as much information as I can based on the information that I have been given when it comes to this book, but that is not something that you have to commit to memory. And in fact, what I will then do, and what you may have seen in my organizing your watercolors video, is I'll create a separate swatch card that just has the color, the name, plus or minus the pigment information that I stick with the palette so that I know it. This is tricky and this depends, and part of me for some reason doesn't want to part with labels. I think is because sometimes I've made mistakes when writing pigment information, or just because pigment information may change and I want to know exactly what I've bought. So for that reason, I do tend to keep labels for the most part. I'm not saying everyone should, but I do. And sometimes what I will do is I will stick them on a piece of watercolor paper, and then I will do the swatches around them. So the information with the color name and all that information is already there. I don't have to rewrite it. I can just do the swatches to actually see how they compare to the label themselves. It is a bit fiddly and it's by no means necessary, but it's just what I've been found to do. And here, for example, with the Roman Schmore, I did the same. It depends. Sometimes I find it very fiddly and I would rather just write it all out, but sometimes it's just good to have what they actually came with, especially if, like me, sometimes you get the numbers mixed up. In terms of pros and cons, a clear pro is the flexibility. The fact that I can change the order, the fact that I can add different papers to it, I can take them away, I can change it as my palettes grow and as my palettes finish. So that's definitely a strong plus. It's my encyclopedia, so I can come back to and really play in and refer to and write notes on. The cons, I would say, is like the size. Which some could say is a plus or a negative. A pro of the size is obviously that I can then do some really nice swatches. I can really play with the colors in here because I have the space to do that. But a con is that you cannot like be carrying this around with you. You can't, this is not the kind of thing that you can carry to the shop if you just wanted to compare, you know, one color to that you were thinking of getting with the colors that you already have. It's just not that portable. It's very much a, at least for me, leave it in a studio, refer back to kind of swatch book as opposed to on the go play with color kind of swatch book. So that's a con. The other thing is that the workmanship. So obviously I wouldn't recommend that you get a moleskin and tear it apart. I did that because I had a moleskin, I hadn't used in a very long time, I wanted to use it, and I had all the other tools to do so. That being said, if you wanted kind of a neater way of doing this, it would be to buy covers, and I'll link this down below for you. You can buy separate covers that are disc friendly, buying the discs and then buying your own watercolor pad or watercolor paper, hole punching it and adding it in, as opposed to tearing this apart. But you know what, I'm a big fan of using what you have, and that is essentially what I did. Well, I have 2 swatch books that I use actively and 1 swatch book that in theory I could use but don't use very often. But this is my favorite system at the moment thus far, and that is why I wanted to highlight this. I know that there were quite a few questions as to how I swatch, why I swatch the way I swatch, how I store my swatches, what is a swatch book, and so much more. So I just felt that it would be good to answer all of them in this video. If you have any questions about this or my system, then please feel free to ask me. I love answering these kind of questions. If you want to know more about how I arrange my watercolors, then be sure to check out this video that I will link at the end for you. Thank you so much for watching. If you're still watching, then you are most definitely a real MVP, and I really, really, really appreciate you. Let me know that you're still watching by telling me all about your own swatch book. Do you have one? Is this something that you're thinking of getting? Is it big? Is it small? Is it disc bound? Is it a folder? Is it a sketchbook? All that information, I'm really curious to know. A special thank you to all my Ko-fi members. Not only are you supporting this channel and me, but you're also supporting me pursuing my art journey. So thank you so much. I will see all of you next week. Bye.